Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. We are on the eve of the state primary election. That is the first primary election since the presidential election of 2000, which was the most secure and accurate and highest turnout election in Michigan history. 5.5 million citizens cast their ballots to make their voices heard in our democracy in that election. More than 200 audits and reviews by a Republican-led committee and the state's Auditor General confirmed their votes were counted accurately and fairly. But in the 20 months since that election, people unhappy with the outcome, unhappy with the will of the 5.5 million voters of our state, have carried out a relentless and coordinated attack on our elections and our democracy. Now, this multifaceted attack is carried out with misinformation, lies, legislative strategy, meritless lawsuits, and threats to and harassment of election officials and their families. The people advancing this attack want to deter American citizens from voting, or, if they do not cast ballots, to undermine the faith in our elections that the will of the people can be overturned. And so today, the day before our first statewide election since 2020, I am here to assure voters that they will be safe and that their rights will be protected in both the primary election tomorrow and the general election in November. We will not tolerate any attempts to disrupt our elections, any voter suppression or election interference attempts in Michigan. My administration has worked with election clerks and law enforcement all across the state to ensure they know how to address such behavior and, if necessary, remove and arrest bad actors. We have provided clerks and law enforcement with materials to ensure they know what is and is not allowed, and have provided a code of conduct that clerks can ask their election workers to sign before their shift. In partnership with officials of integrity all across the state, we will protect the voting rights of every citizen and ensure that every valid vote is counted. So I encourage all eligible citizens to confidently participate in our primary election. Polling places will be open tomorrow from 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. statewide, and voters can hand deliver their absentee ballots to their clerk's office or drop box by 8 p.m. Those who have not registered will still be able to do so at their clerk's office until 8 p.m., and they can immediately request and vote with an absentee ballot right there in the office. I ask that anyone who witnesses voter intimidation or election interference immediately contact their local election clerk's office, local law enforcement, or call the Voter Protection Hotline at 866-OUR-VOTE. I also want to remind voters that there may be additional attempts to mislead them after the polls close tomorrow and through November. Bad actors could wrongly claim that the time it takes to finish counting absentee ballots is evidence of malfeasance rather than simply acknowledging the truth that counting often continues long after polls close because the Michigan State Legislature has not provided Michigan election clerks time before Election Day to pre-process absentee ballots. Many other states provide multiple days or weeks for pre-processing, and I have joined clerks in asking for pre-processing time here in Michigan for years. Also, I ask that voters are mindful that additional election result confusion can occur if media reports results after polls close, and note that they have data from nearly all precincts, but voters don't remember that half those precincts' ballots may have been cast absentee and therefore not be included in the actual results. Then, as absentee ballot counting boards do finish counting, it can appear as if the total vote counts increased by large numbers long after polls closed and media reported results from most, if not all, precincts. So finally, after the primary or general election, election canvassers may attempt to sow seeds of doubt in Michigan's elections by refusing to carry out their duty under the law to canvass and certify the election if their preferred candidate doesn't win. Such actions will be futile, as our court system will either force them or other canvassers to certify the elections in accordance with the law, but the canvassers already refused to certify elections in New Mexico, and the same illegal ploy could be attempted here or elsewhere in the nation before the end of the year. If it does, we'll be prepared. I ask that voters be wary of false claims for refusal to certify, including the minor clerical errors that cause some precincts to be out of balance every election, and conspiracy theories about voting machines. The truth is always available, and I urge voters to turn to official, trusted sources to find it. My office will continue to publish it in full transparency, as do local and county election clerks across the state. I have always said that democracy is a team sport. It works best when we all participate and when we all, Republicans, Democrats, and independents, stand up to protect its integrity. I'm confident that election officials in Michigan will do that tomorrow and again in November, and by doing so, we will ensure that all eligible citizens are able to vote, have their vote counted, and make their voice heard. I'm now happy to take a few questions.
I have 3 questions. Secretary, thank you
Hi.
for seeing us. The first one, you said, will not be tolerated.
Yes.
Shenanigans will not be tolerated.
Exactly.
Can you be more specific? So you say there will be arrests. What does that mean exactly? Then I have 2 follow-up questions.
There are clear rules and laws about how both election observers, challengers, and poll workers are expected to behave in a polling place. It's all with an eye towards ensuring that our election officials are protected and our voters are protected, and the entire environment is smooth and secure. So if there are continued violations of those parameters around which poll workers, challengers, and observers must abide by, we will consider that to be disruption and cause for removal.
So when you say removal, is that arrest or removal up to arrest, or what are the penalties? What's the teeth?
The consequence will follow the action. So if there is a law that is violated that would call for an arrest, certainly arrest would be made. We hope that it does not rise to that issue. We hope that everyone who is present in any polling place throughout the state of Michigan on Election Day tomorrow will simply follow the rules, follow the law. And these are rules that have been placed for over a decade. And if that doesn't happen, then there will be consequences ranging from removal to arrest based on the severity of the violation of the law.
And you also talked about a code of conduct. But what do you do when the gatekeepers themselves, who I would assume have a code of conduct also, prescribed ethics involved? You've got a St. Clair County clerk who's running on the fact that the only reason his elections in that state, or rather in that county, can be trusted is because his candidate won. So when you have the gatekeepers, what do you do about the gatekeepers?
As the state's chief election officer, my job is to make sure that every aspect, every county, every locality in our state is proceeding according to the law. And that's precisely why we've been working with county clerks across the state and local clerks to ensure not only that they're familiar with the law, but that we know as the chief election officer and the statewide Bureau of Elections is there to ensure the law is followed. And we'll continue to do that. And the other thing I'll note in terms of the results of the election and saying and somehow tying the credibility of our elections to the results as opposed to the transparency of the process itself is that for anyone who has questions about the process, we operate our elections, and every clerk does this as well, in an open and transparent way through post-election audits and the like. There are several secure layers in place to ensure that every valid vote is counted and that the results of the election are an accurate reflection of the will of the people. That is what should cause someone to trust the results of the election, not the particular outcome of the election.
And I just say I had 3. So, yes. And the final one is, and I'm going to go back to that gatekeeper thing, because if the gatekeepers are the ones fanning those flames, and if they're the ones saying, hey, you cannot trust the elections unless the people we want to win, how do you deal with that in terms of code of conduct, as well as behavior, as well as law, as well as protecting democracy when, again, it is the gatekeepers who are opening that gate?
In my view, the real gatekeepers in our democracy are the voters and the truth that is on the side of protecting their voice and their vote. So in my view, the law is quite clear on the validation of votes, the tabulation of votes, and the outcome of the elections themselves. We, in my office, and the vast majority of clerks, if not all of the clerks in the state, will continue to follow the law in partnership with law enforcement officials and the Attorney General's office. But at the end of the day, and we encourage voters to see this, An empowered voter knowing the truth of our elections is the strongest antidote to misinformation, regardless of its source. And because of that, our office has issued a fact-check website, michigan.gov/SOS-FactCheck, where we are countering misinformation from wherever it comes from throughout this election cycle. And so we encourage people to go there, and we encourage voters to take it upon themselves to ask questions, to seek the truth, to read the law, and to understand that election officials, by and large, are there to support their will coming to fruition, whatever that may be. And if at any point there's an interference or disruption in the process from anyone, we will be there along with the State Attorney General and law enforcement to ensure that the law is followed and that voters are protected.
Madam Secretary, are you taking a wait and see on this, or from what you're hearing, are you fully anticipating there's going to be court challenges or instances that you described?
Well, you know, in 2020, we had a very smooth election. There was no disruption despite our preparation for any potential challenges. And that's what I'm hoping for again tomorrow, a smooth election process where everyone follows the law, that voters are welcomed into precincts, and that it's ultimately a good day for our state, as I believe Election Day should be. It's a beautiful thing in our state, in our country, and our democracy. So with that in mind, I'm very hopeful that we'll see a smooth process just as we did in 2020. Although looking into 2020, we know that even a smooth process can yield a lot of post-election shenanigans. So we're also prepared for that as well. We may see people laying the seeds for post-election shenanigans on Election Day tomorrow, and we do see and we do hear some chatter about that, and so we're prepared for that. But my hope and what we've also prepared for is for the election officials across the state to be prepared for any disruptions, to minimize their impact on the process itself, and to ensure whether on Election Day or in the days that follow that we ultimately have a smooth process that protects the will of the voters and ensures the law is followed.
Follow up, if I may, real quick. I'm sorry, down there. When it comes to public trust, and you've talked about a pounding of this message of election integrity by those who want to undermine it, how do you sit here today and assess perhaps what damage has been done? The public maybe not as informed on voting processes and how clerks' offices work, et cetera, and having to unfurl that. How much damage has been done over the past 2 years? Are you seeing people becoming more aware of misinformation?
I will say that I've seen two things. One, an escalation of attempts to disrupt the elections process through misinformation. When those attempts continually fail to actually disrupt the process, they do leave behind a trail of doubt and misinformation in the minds of many voters. That is a threat to election security, and it's a threat that we take very seriously, and why we're continuing to expand our resources to counter misinformation and to build partnerships with other messengers and communities, pastors, faith leaders, attorneys, others, who will hopefully, as many have, continue in partnership with us to speak that truth that is readily available. But the second thing I've seen from many clerks in particular around our state are more people stepping up to increase the transparency of the process, which is a great thing. For example, before every election, we have a public accuracy test where the public is welcome to observe the process and the testing of voting machines to ensure their accuracy. We've seen more interest in that than before, which is a great thing, because the more eyes on the process, the better, the more well-intentioned eyes, I should say. But in addition to that, we've seen clerks from around the state also open up their doors and be more proactive in sharing information about our elections and how they work, which is a good thing as well. More information into the process is good. But again, that all runs alongside an escalating effort to take information, twist it to further political or partisan gains, and that's what we're also seeing increase, which is concerning. And that's why, in my view, the best antidote to that is for voters to join us in working to ensure we are all messengers of trusted information, seeking the truth and repeating it and spreading it.
Madam Secretary, following up on the punishment questions, you said canvassers have already vowed they're not going to certify the election. We've seen it in other states. What can be done about that, or are they free to make their statement knowing that it's going to get overturned anyway?
I think two things. As I've said, any effort to disrupt the canvassing process will ultimately be futile. The law is clear. County and the State Board of Canvassers have a legal responsibility to certify the elections. But what we will anticipate, as we've seen happen in New Mexico and potentially in Pennsylvania, is this effort to block certification used not to actually block certification, because the certification will come, but to delay it and to use the time that delay creates to further misinformation, to sow seeds of doubt that maybe the results weren't accurate when in reality they are and were. We'll continue through post-election audits and the like to continue to affirm the accuracy of our elections and our secure processes, but we want voters to know when they hear about these attempts to see them not as sincere, well-intentioned attempts to block a certification, but attempts that are instead designed to confuse them, delegitimize our democracy, delegitimize our elections, and in turn delegitimize those who are elected through these processes. The bottom line is, I won't stand for any of it. I will not tolerate any efforts to delegitimize any aspect of our process, and will continue to stand firm alongside our partners throughout the state, at the state and local level, to protect the election results, to ensure that accurate election results are certified, and that our democracy continues to rule the day in our state.
But so other than getting the word out ahead of time, there's nothing you can do to stop them? You're kind of helpless to letting them do their ploy?
We are ahead of time letting them know about the consequences, that essentially it will be a futile attempt that will only in some ways position them as someone who is taking a sacred duty as a local or state board of canvassers and taking that duty and acting in a illegal way in failing to fulfill that duty. In my view, I don't know why anyone would embrace the responsibility, the important responsibility of serving on a canvassing board and then fail to fulfill that legal responsibility under the law. So I hope that they know and they hear us when we say we will counter their misinformation and we will counter their efforts and ensure our elections are certified, even if it takes longer based on shenanigans. And I hope they choose to follow the law, comply with the law, and protect the voice of the people as opposed to going against it.
Okay, so it sounds like there's no consequence to them doing it other than ruining their reputation. I mean, I know you've pushed for legislation to streamline this whole process. Is that something that could happen, is to add some teeth to this so it's not just we trust they love the law?
Well, look, I think democracy prevailed in 2020 because people of integrity did the right thing and followed the law. And we have learned and seen and observed over the past few years just how fragile our democracy can be, that it does require people in the system to follow the law and protect the process. So when there's a process breakdown because a person or multiple people don't follow the rules, then certainly that is cause for concern and cause for potentially re-examining the process itself to protect against a reoccurrence of that in the future. But I think it's important for us to see this as an ongoing effort to protect our democracy against ongoing challenges to it, some of which comes through the certification process. My goal is to make sure that we continue to protect the will of the people and follow the law in doing so, and hold those who abdicate their responsibility under the law responsible. But it is a team effort and requires voters as well to understand what's really going on behind these tactics, that it's not a legitimate effort to try to block certification, but it's a futile effort to do so in an eye towards spreading misinformation and trying to sow seeds of doubt among voters' minds about falsely about the legitimacy of the election.
What do you make of all this? There's an attack on democracy, and you have gatekeepers who are part of the attack on democracy.
I think, I was reflecting on this morning, it really is remarkable that we live in a democracy where tomorrow, and really for the past few weeks, over 1 million voters from the state of Michigan will be participating in choosing the next leaders of this state at the state and local level. And here we are talking about concerted efforts, some of them by candidates themselves, to undermine that basic process. I have seen throughout these last few years that the vast majority of voters and people and leaders in the state and this country believe in democracy and want it to survive. But we do see a number of bad actors continuing to escalate and coordinate their attempts to undermine the very principles of who we are. And I would just ask them to recognize that what they're doing is hurting who we are as Michiganders, it's hurting our democracy, and it's not going to be successful in actually overturning a valid election, because every attempt that they make will be met with our work as gatekeepers to protect the will of the people. And the vast majority of clerks, gatekeepers in the state, are on the side of democracy. We've worked with them to make sure they have the resources they need to counter these efforts. And I hope, that we'll ultimately see, as these efforts continue to be futile, a de-escalation and a reduction of these challenges. But we're in the middle of this right now, and we have to recognize in this moment we're all called upon to act in the best way we can to protect our democracy. I hope that those seeking or with intentions to disrupt the process will recognize the futility of it and the un-American nature of it. But we will be prepared either way, as we always must be. And we ask voters to stand with us in ensuring we stay vigilant, counter any misinformation with the truth, and above all, celebrate who we are as Americans and Michiganders by participating in our elections, both tomorrow and through November.
Throughout the campaign, what passed the last campaign, your office is one of the few offices that did hire minorities, including Hester Wheeler coming to your office, and your offices reflect the state. Most of the offices don't reflect it. And the campaigns don't reflect black media or black spending, but they want the black vote. Tomorrow, by no hamstams of most people, most of y'all will move on to November. But what do you feel we need to do as a state to make sure that the black media buys is respected like you want the black vote?
Well, I think no matter where someone lives or who they vote for or what city they live in or where they are in the state, we want to ensure their voice is heard. And we want to ensure our government is a reflection of every voice, of every perspective in the state. That's what democracy is about. So we'll continue to try to lead through our example in that regard and encourage everyone to know the power of their voice, the power of participation, and the power of being a part of our democracy that leads to the power to ensure the policies that are made by our seat of government, Lansing, and nationally reflect the will of every voice of every person.
But still, the black spending in black press, black media, including with your campaign, I respect the fact that you did bang on Hester. You do have a diverse team, but the spending is not the same. And I got to give you credit. You and Janice Winfrey were looked at as stellar from the people who really looked at the facts. And the national gave you that attention. But locally, you know, we still fight with the ignorance of past 16-mile road. And sometime on this side, what are we going to do to make sure that the black vote is counted in terms of spending black to get to the black vote? There's a lot of white agencies getting money to come get the black vote, but you're not using black media.
Well, that's helpful feedback. I think we'll make sure that we're continuing to partner with everyone. And I've sat down with officials in Detroit and Southfield and Pontiac and many other communities all throughout the state to make sure they have access to the trusted information that we provide as misinformation and voter suppression tactics continue to flood into communities of color in our state. And so we're going to continue to do that through November and welcome your input in other ways we can ensure we are reaching every voter in this state.
I'd be interested in a thought from you too. Similar track about circumventing public will when we talk about constitutional amendments on the ballot and the ruling that recently came down on adopt and amend when it came to the wages, and that was deemed unconstitutional, and we obviously have other issues coming. Your thought on that, the challenge via adopt and amend, and for those that feel it may threaten public will when we talk about constitutional amendments on the ballot?
I think that we need to ensure our system, whether it's the petition process or the lawmaking process, accurately reflects the will of the people. I mean, that's how it's supposed to work. Laws and lawmakers and the way that laws are developed should reflect the will of the people in this state. And so to the extent that there have been efforts through the legislative process to potentially counter or block that will, it's good and affirming to see the Supreme Court come to the defense of the intent of the voter and the intent of those supporting policies. So I think we'll continue to see that evolve, but what it has shed light on are what oftentimes is behind closed doors tactics to try to nullify the will of the people that really runs counter to who our lawmakers are supposed to represent and the work that they're supposed to be doing in Lansing.
Do you see this though as an existing threat, or do you think the court ruling has shut the door on it, or do you see
We'll see.
Still?
I mean, we'll see how things evolve from here. It's an ongoing issue. The court ruling certainly was clear in drawing a line between what is appropriate and what is not, and potentially shuts the door on it. But I think what we've seen proliferate over the last few years in particular, whether it comes to the rules regarding our democracy or other rules in our state, is an effort to potentially, through gerrymandering or other means, develop policies that don't necessarily reflect the will of the people. And so that will continue to be a challenge. But the best counter, in my view, to that challenge is participation, which is why we want people to vote, which is why we want people to participate in our elections and hold all of our elected officials accountable.
I remember there being something about yes mean yes, no mean no. Our ballot which I've already voted, it's still confusing when it comes to the proposals. I'm backing up what he's saying. The proposals are not clear. Do you think of doing anything to make sure that people can understand? A lot of people don't want to vote because they go there and they get totally confused. They don't know the candidates, and they definitely don't know these paragraphs that we don't even understand, even as people who are engaged.
The substance of the ballots themselves are another example of why we need voters to be informed and engaged and seek trusted sources of information at a time, particularly when misinformation is growing, whether it be about the substance of what's on the ballot or how to vote itself. So that's why, again, arming ourselves with the truth and facts is critical, and there are a lot of nonpartisan organizations out there, coalitions of groups that are seeking to ensure that voters know information both about policies and candidates as well as the procedures of elections themselves. My job as the state's chief election officer is simply to ensure that the process works for everyone, and that's what we'll continue to do. Even in relation to ongoing attempts to try to disrupt that process, of which there are many and of which we're prepared to counter, our job continues to make sure that people know that they can trust the results of the election is accurate and that democracy is worth participating in and believing in. And we'll continue to build a process that reflects those values and those truths and encourage voters, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, to join us in making democracy work for everyone and countering efforts of those trying to disrupt and undermine it.
Madam Secretary, allow me one more question, please.
course,
I just want to ask the question differently. Let me just ask the question differently. What are potential penalties? Because I understand there's a process, but if you have someone, including a clerk or precinct workers, who are disrupting the vote, or if they are proponents of the election lies, whether or not you can trust what they say, what are the potential penalties for what you call shenanigans? Because you can say, I will not tolerate. Does that mean a timeout? Does that mean, you're being naughty and I'm just going to talk to you? What are the potential penalties? Because people understand penalties, not necessarily something as nebulous as I will not tolerate.
I think the penalties are tied to the actual specific violation of the law, and they're for the most part laid out either in the law or determined by judges. So that said, the penalties themselves and the consequences of wrongdoing in elections are spelled out in the law and usually ultimately determined by the courts. My job is to simply say, we believe that there should and must be consequences, and as the state's chief election officer, we will partner with law enforcement to ensure that there are.
Secretary, are these types of warnings that you're giving today, are these just going to be a part of our regular permanent
I hope not.
election process going forward? How we get over these conspiracies? It seems like this is what we're going to remember your tenure.
I hope we look at the time I've served as the time in which we've seen the highest turnout elections in Michigan history, which 2020 certainly underscored, but also when we stood up and effectively countered a nationally coordinated effort that is specifically focused on Michigan and a few other states to try to undermine democracy. The job requires we rise to the task, as our office has done time and time again, to counter those efforts and to continue to protect the processes themselves, regardless of who wins and regardless who comes out victorious. The will of the voters will stand. And so we'll continue to simply educate people about the rights and wrongs and the truths and the falsehoods of the system. But I see every opportunity, particularly in this moment, as an opportunity for voters to become more engaged, more knowledgeable about the system than ever before. And through that, I actually have hope that we will emerge from this moment with a stronger, healthier, and more robust democracy than ever before, with more people engaged, more people participating, and more people playing an active role in the process. And I'll just say, as an example of that, and then why I believe we're moving in that direction, we've seen over 6,000 new poll workers sign up, people signing up through our Democracy MVP program over the last few months to participate in the process. Well-intentioned individuals from both sides of the aisle who simply want to play a part in making sure they stand up to these shenanigans and that elections work for everyone. That's what gives me hope. That, alongside the high turnout and levels of participation we're continuing to see, That's what gives me hope. And now as we move forward into tomorrow, after the polls close, again, I do want to remind everyone that it will take time to process and tabulate every valid vote. And we need to work collectively to ensure we're communicating that we don't allow that time to become a space for bad actors to spread misinformation about the process, but that we instead show this is how democracy works. We take our time, we process and validate every vote, we ensure only valid votes and that every valid vote is counted, and that we protect that system against any external efforts, partisan or otherwise, to try to interfere with that sacred activity that we do in a democracy and protecting the will of the people. So thank you. I'm sure I'll see you all again soon, and I hope everyone here remembers to vote tomorrow. Thanks.
Thank you, Madam Secretary.
Thank you. Thanks. Good to see you.